Welcome back to another Maestro's Vibe. My name is Kevin Argueta, one of your co-hosts of Maestro's Vibe.
Aloha, this is Juan Jefe Espinal. Super duper stoked to be back on the microphone with y'all. Thank you for joining us here again.
Yes, so excited to be back. This is Karina Hernandez. And who do we have today, Kevin?
Hey, so we have another one of our esteemed guests. We only have esteemed guests on this podcast, and we are so honored and privileged to bring on the microphone our representative, Jeanne Kapela. Jeanne, how are you doing today?
Aloha, everyone. I am doing fantastic. I'm so stoked to be here with all of you today, and to everyone who's watching and listening. I represent District 5 on the island of Hawaii, so that's Kona to Ka'u in the State House of Representatives, and I am so stoked to be here with District 5 educators. So it's a privilege for me to join you.
Thank you so much. Yes, we're so excited to have you on here. You represent our district that we all teach at, and we are so grateful for you to be a champion of public schools in all the work that you do. And to all of our listeners out there, if you want to be a champion of public schools, please support us. You can go to www.maestrosvibe.com/donate, and you can find out how you can continue to support this passion project where we make schools cool to talk about. And on that end, making schools cool to talk about, Jeanne, you've been doing a lot of work with schools, outside of schools, but all pertaining to schools. And one of the things that you found yourself in is being the vice chair of the education committee on this go around with the legislative sessions. Can you bring us in behind the curtains? What does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Behind the curtains. Okay. I think behind the curtains, it looks a lot like fighting an uphill battle. And I think as educators, you folks feel that oftentimes you're the first people in the classroom, you're the first gate of understanding what our schools really need, how they need to operate, and also how our students need to feel. And how you folks need to feel. And I think oftentimes that doesn't necessarily transcend into the legislature where all of these ideals and visions are being planned and made. So for me, it's been this really uphill battle of really bringing in teacher voices, really listening and diving in, and making sure that we're uplifting and creating space for the people that are the most knowledgeable in these areas, specifically educators, and other areas as well of whatever part of our economic plan we're trying to work on, bringing in those leaders. So that's really been one of my biggest goals as a progressive champion, but also as just an individual who truly, genuinely cares about what our education system looks like and what it feels like, both as a student and as a teacher. So I think behind the scenes, it's been a little bit rough, specifically this legislative session coming out of the pandemic. But it's been really exciting, and I'm excited to share some of the specific pieces of legislation that we've worked on that kind of tackle different areas, specifically standards, ending standardized testing, or at least limiting it, making sure that we're moving towards more authentic assessments, and really empowering teachers to be the classroom leaders that they've always been, and making sure that the Department of Education or the legislature or the BOE or Board of Education aren't standing in the way and holding handcuffs, but instead just uplifting and creating that space for leaders, teachers to be the leaders that they truly are.
That's an amazing role. I just wanted to applaud you in your uphill battle because I think any educator, heck, any student that's listening right now and it can relate to that, because sometimes it really does feel like you're fighting against the ocean. Even though everyone is trying to do the same thing, it feels like it doesn't always happen that way. So we just applaud you for what you do, because it does matter to you. I mean, you came through our schools here in this very district, which to me is really impactful. And I hope that students listening, I mean, would you be able to share anything about that to them?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, and thank you for that. And thank you for everything that you folks do, because I think the reality is that there's so much disconnection between the legislative body or the people that we see as leaders and the people that live in our communities. And not only is there disconnection between what's past and what we're talking about, but there's also this disconnection of just not being present. And I consistently tell students that you have to show up. And I consistently tell people in my community, or people that want to get involved in politics or in the legislature, that you just have to show up and show up as you are. And it doesn't matter if you're perfect or if you have all of your ideals or ideas put together or your thought process put together yet, but show up and stand up for your values. And I think that that's one of the most important parts of either being in office, but also just being a leader, because you don't have to be in office to be a leader. And I think that's one thing that our public school system really taught me. Is for me, I so genuinely care about Konawaina, and I so genuinely care about Kahakai and all of the schools that are in my district, and Na'alehu, which is also in there, and Ho'okena and Hononau. I think a big part of it is because I did go through that system. From kindergarten all the way through high school, I still remember so many of the teachers that I had that are still teaching at all these different schools. And it's so amazing now to go back as a legislator and see that they're still there, still fighting for the same strength, I think, that they want all of their students to have. So I think that's where I did want to talk today about just how much representation really does matter, because it's such a big difference. In Hawaii, on Hawaii Island in District 5, we've never had a woman, Native Hawaiian, or anyone born and raised in our community ever represented in the State House. So this is a huge shift on what's possible. And for me, it's reimagining what really is possible. I know that I'm the first, but I know for sure that I will not be the last. So any student who's out there listening, know that your voice is so valid and that you have so much that you can contribute just by living your life, just by existing. Because your mere existence changes the way that our legislature operates, changes the way that our political leaders and our thought leaders operate. Because at the end of the day, we constantly think that in order to be a leader, you have to be this perfect, wealthy, oftentimes white, or a man, or much older, that you can't show up as you are. And that you have to be someone who's a doctor or a lawyer or a business executive. And the reality is that you don't. We need every single demographic inside the state legislature in order to have a voice that represents the people. Because if you look at our current legislature, it doesn't represent the diversity that lives and breathes within our communities. So when young people and people of color and women get involved in politics and show up, just your mere existence of standing in that building or chanting outside, as I was yesterday with one of the rallies to end Asian hate and hate against Asians and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. All of those people standing out there yesterday, and all the people that stand on the side of the road and sign wave and protest, make such a big difference. Their mere existence is a shift in the culture of the toxic culture of what's existed in legislative work and politics in America. So it's exciting to be around that, and it's exciting to be a part of that. And I'm excited for all of the young people that are listening, that are out there, that have so much lived experience in them and will make so much change moving forward.
So powerful. Oh, thank you for sharing that, and just thank you for existing and for fighting for what you want to accomplish. It inspires me to keep going, and it makes me so happy to have a friend in that building who is making changes like you have mentioned. And I know that Kev asked what happens behind closed doors, and you shared a little bit of that, and thank you. And what are some of the other legislation that you have championed in this session?
Thank you. Some different things that I've championed this legislative session. I ran on a very progressive agenda, and where do I even start? Because there's so many things that I'm really excited about. So for me, a big thing is raising the social infrastructure within our communities. We want to make sure that we are building strong communities and raising strong children. I think one of the best ways that we can focus on our keiki is by ensuring that our families are really strong, that we are building things like community schools. So we introduced a resolution this year to help expand community schools. And community schools, they're kind of like the iPhone of schools, right? They have not just a wonderful education and beautiful classrooms and buildings, but they also have things like healthcare, and not just for the student, but for the entire family. Because oftentimes, especially in rural communities like we live in,
Oh yeah.
you have older sister or older brother staying home to take care of their little sibling when the little sibling is sick. So if we have community schools, this ensures that when little sibling is sick, that big brother, big sister are able to go to school as well, and they all get the healthcare that they need right at school. So we're making schools the pillar and the foundation of our communities. So I think that that's something that's really exciting. Another thing that we introduced this year, that I actually got to be the chair for, vice chairs get to chair, in air quotes, since some of you are just listening. They chair the committee hearings for resolutions. So I got to chair a resolution on changing the name of McKinley High School back to Honolulu High School. President McKinley often really referred to here in the state of Hawaii as the man who annexed the Hawaiian Kingdom. So very racist history there, and changing the name from McKinley back to Honolulu High School and taking down the McKinley statue is huge. So we heard that resolution. Unfortunately, it was deferred, but I'm really glad that we were able to have that conversation, because I think that really moves the dial forward and really challenges the legislative body to step up to the plate and look in the face of what kind of racial history we've had here in Hawaii and across the U.S. Something else that we worked on this year was my office introduced a constitutional amendment to fully fund our public schools. So that was something that's really exciting. Oftentimes, there's a bill that's alive right now that is to build a new prison. And the reality is that we wouldn't have to build new prisons if we built better schools. Mm-hmm. So it's making sure that we're fully funding our education system is something that I've been really, really dedicated to and will continue to fight for, because that's what we need. That's where we need to be putting our money. And that's not something that we should just talk about during an election season, but something that we should be talking about and fighting for every single day. Other things I've really fought for this year are things like the social infrastructure that I was talking about, a living wage, which means at least $17 an hour for working families. We also need things like paid sick and family leave. We just came out of the coronavirus pandemic, and we're still starting to recover. Mm-hmm. It's unconscionable that people don't have access to paid sick or paid family leave. And as a young woman, I one day want to be able to have a family. I want to know that myself and my partner will be able to take that time off to help care for our children. And then we've also worked on things like green fees. So green fees are really exciting because it's ensuring that in our tourist-driven economy, because even now that we're coming back from the pandemic, I don't know if you've tried to rent a car lately, but rental car prices through the roof. Nice. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are back. And not wearing masks, may I also add. So throwing this in here, please continue to wear your mask. But green fees would ensure that tourists pay their fair share to preserve our natural resources here in our state. So lots of different things. And then another really cool thing that I did introduce this year, which unfortunately didn't pass, but was to appoint a teacher to the Board of Education. Something that is like, wow, how can we not even have that yet? But that's something we're gonna keep working on, so.
Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, as I hear—
that was kind of a mouthful.
You know, the interesting part here, Jeanne, is that as I hear you share, a lot of what you're sharing are things that are legislative priorities for our union, for HSTA, you know, and I think that's really cool that we have someone who is able to champion things that we're also trying to champion, because it takes a village, you know, and I know we say that and we hear that often, but it's so true. It takes a village for our schools to really make a positive impact in the lives of our children, but the lives of our families, right? Because children, they need strong families in order to be supported throughout school, just like they need strong teachers. And just for our listeners, Jeanne, when you say that you introduced the bill to fully fund education, I know that some of our listeners are also on the continent, and that idea of fully funding education is foreign to them. Their system looks a little bit different. Can you explain how that might look different here in Hawaii?
Yes. So I will actually start by saying that one of the places that we actually got this specific constitutional amendment from was actually pieces of legislation that have been passed in Washington and in other places around the nation. But part of it is ensuring that we're changing in our constitution, our state constitution. Hawaii, our public school system doesn't necessarily, there's no words in it that say that it has to be either thorough and efficient. So it doesn't say the quality of the education. It just says that every student is guaranteed the right to a public school education. But there doesn't have anything in there that says we have to have a thorough or a quality education. So therefore, by inserting those words into our constitution, we can say that thorough and efficient. What does that mean? That means that we have to pay our teachers. That means that we have to be able to have an education level that is where teachers are supported, so that they can feel like, so that they can come to work and not have to think about, oh, what am I going to do for my second and my third job? They can just focus on the work that they're doing and their students. And so we're taking that pressure off of teachers. That society adds and the state of Hawaii adds, because we live in this incredibly expensive space that literally just caters towards tourists and not towards its people. It also ensures that, because I think one of the realities is that we as a state, even with I'm going to go into the American Rescue Plan, even with the money that's coming down federally, there's still we're still short in our Department of Education budget. It's still very, very short compared to what it needs to be. Even with all of the adjustments that have been made and with the federal money, we still aren't giving the money that we need to ensure that our educators are being paid, that our schools are actually fully funded, that they are no longer worrying about whether or not they have adequate staffing to be able to clean classrooms. So things like that. And that's, and I mean, as we're reopening, I know that all of you are now seeing your students in the classroom face to face. And I think the reality is that we don't have enough staff on campus. At least I've been told multiple times that we don't have the staff on campus in order to keep classrooms clean, in order to ensure that everyone feels safe, whether that's students, parents, teachers, admin, faculty. We can't return unless we're actually funding our schools and making sure that our teachers feel safe in the classroom. So by inserting those two words, thorough and efficient, we can guarantee what it would look like and how do I say this? And how we treat and how we fund our public schools and where we put them on the level of what's important in our state. Because right now, if you look at our state budget, $180,000 short, that's like, I think it's close to that. But the reality is that we're so short that we obviously aren't putting education as the highest priority, which anyone who focuses on education should know, or cares about education should know, or cares about economy should know, that education and educators are the #1 priority for a strong economic base. You can't have a future if you don't educate your children. So that was a long-winded answer to what you were trying to ask.
No, I'm personally very glad that you're fighting to add the word thorough. If I could share a little story, just a little story, because I was having a conversation at my school about how one byproduct of this whole pandemic learning I find is that there's smaller class sizes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just by nature of how things are. And the trade-off is other people have much larger class sizes in like digital classrooms and things like that, right? So there's a trade-off. It's not actually smaller. But anyway, I was having a conversation with my staff and I was sharing. I was like, I really truly believe this is awesome. We can see that small class sizes are pretty cool, and I think we should be proponents of that. And I was speaking to people and they were like, that's a good idea. But if we start doing that, then we're going to have to start cutting PE, and then we're going to have to start cutting art. And I'm saying to myself, no, this is where the conversation is very askew. I never said I want to cut PE. I never said I want to cut art. I just said I think we should continue to prioritize small classrooms. That other stuff is just as it has to be thorough. You can't just say that doesn't exist anymore because now we want this. If we want a thorough education, I just want to let you know I'm all for that as well. And I appreciate people fighting for that, because it's so easily do we partition education into these little things that we try to measure, when in reality, it's holistic. And we need to treat people as humans, and we need to expose them to as many experiences as we possibly can. So just thank you for that work.
Thank you. And I think it's going off of that, one thing that you brought up was that someone said automatically, okay, then we would have to cut this. And I think we live right now, and we were so accustomed to this. We can't have something more. We can't have something better. If we're going to if we like this, then we have to get rid of something else. And the reality is that it shouldn't work that way, that we should find ways of generating new revenue so that we can build the kind of schools that are necessary and fund and hire the extra staff and the extra educators to be able to offer smaller classroom sizes with arts education, with PE, with digital technology and all those things. And because I do understand that one of the biggest reasons why we can't find these like digital content creating teachers is because they can make more money in that field than in the classroom. And the reality is that if we want to fix that, then we got to find new ways to fund education. And we need to ensure that we have those standards there to make sure that these are the kinds of classroom sizes we're going to have. We will find the money to build larger schools, to build more schools, instead of building prisons. And that's how you pipeline to prison, by actually investing in schools. And then it also brings one thing that you also talked about kind of was I'm going to go into standards, because I feel like that also very much relates to what you're talking about, is making sure that we aren't just teaching to standardized tests, and allowing teachers to really be able to jump in and continue the work that they're doing, not just focusing on a test. I mean, New York consortium schools, they don't actually do the standardized tests. They're focused on making sure that students are getting their arts education, that they're getting this holistic, very well-rounded education, and not just teaching to that standardized test. So I think here in Hawaii, if we really want a quality education, we really need to move away from standardized tests and towards real, authentic assessments and real learning experiences. So yeah, rant over.
No, I like that. And I like the tax that you also mentioned on tourism and, for people to pay their share coming here. I'm thinking about standardized tests, because I believe schools get money from that, right? So let's say if we've gotten rid of standardized testing, where would the funding for schools come? Because I know that here it's different, right, from California. I know that California property taxes paid for the schools, and depending on the area that you live, what's the quality of the school. And here, I remember when I got here, I was like, these are $1 million homes that live in this community. I figured the schools were going to be funded that way, but that's not the case. So when I started shifting my thoughts on standardized testing, one thing I thought that was good was like, well, at least we get money from this. But how would that work out?
Okay, so one other bill that I did introduce this year was a bill that would have raised $1.5 billion over the course of the biennium. So that's every 2 years. And that would have been enough to plug the entire budget shortfall for the state of Hawaii during the coronavirus pandemic, what came from the pandemic. And that would have been through taxing the wealthy, taxing like the uber wealthy among us, which we all know, where you were just talking about, you have these homes that are like millions of dollars right on the coast, and we have so many of them in our state, and none of them, we don't tax them at that highest bracket that they actually should be taxed at. We're taxing, if you look at our scale, it's so backwards that people that are making minimum wage, at the end of the day, they pay more in taxes than people that are wealthy. When you add in the GET, when you add in all of these extra things that we have to pay and that we're buying more of, because when you're really wealthy, you're still just one person, but you have more money than you can ever spend in your entire lifetime over multiple lifetimes. So that bill would have taxed the rich, and that's what we need to do. When we step away from standardized testing, yes, it's unfortunate that that's where federal money comes from. And I think more than anything, that in itself is BS. We shouldn't have to test students on these standardized tests, which if you look at the standardized tests today that they're giving in the middle of the pandemic, they're giving these tests that are standardized tests that are half of what they were last year. So how can you please tell me, how can that be a true standardized test if it's half of what it was last year? Like where on the scale are you measuring that? And how accurate is that? So that's the reality that I'm saying, is that I truly don't think it is. But the fact is that we really box students in and we box teachers in by forcing that. And I think the reality is that in Hawaii, we need to find new ways of generating revenue so that we really can build the schools that our keiki deserve, making sure that we're stepping away from those standardized tests. And that's how we do it, by doing things like taxing the rich, adding green fees, ensuring legalizing recreational cannabis use. Instead of, like what I said earlier, instead of saying that we have to cut X to have Y, why can't we have X, Y, and Z?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a whole mind shift, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a complete mind shift, and that's what we need. In order for one thing to work, we have to have all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Love that. Yes.
And here, talking about mind shifts, Jeanne, and thinking about what feeds our brains, which are books. We are proponents of books on the podcast, and we're proponents of podcasts. And I know that you brought something for our listeners out there, for our literature circle. So, Jeanne, what have you brought today?
So today I brought Brene Brown's book called Daring Greatly. And it is a phenomenal book. It's something that I've read and then reread many, many times. And it's how to find courage through being vulnerable, and how vulnerability can really transform your life. And that's, for me, as someone who is a freshman lawmaker, as someone who like never necessarily saw myself going into politics, who grew up in a really poor community and didn't have lots of opportunities or options growing up, being courageous and being vulnerable and leaning into my own personal story so that I can share it with the world, because I know I'm not alone in some of the different things that I've faced in my life and the obstacles that I've faced. And for me, I think when we lean into that vulnerability, that's how we build great communities. And that's how we share great leadership, and that's how we connect to one another. And I think right now, when in the middle of a pandemic, when people feel so disconnected from one another, we need to be able to find new ways of connecting and sharing our personal stories and allowing them to merge together so that we do really build the fabric of our communities. That is, to me, really, really great, courageous leadership. Because it's not always easy to be vulnerable and to share those sticky, icky parts of ourselves that we really don't want to, but are actually really cool and very necessary. So I brought this book. Also, she has a number of books, but she also is actually really funny and has a really great Netflix series. So go, and if you have Netflix, definitely watch her over there as well. So that's what I brought with me today. And going back very briefly to what Karina said, and I think that it also relates very much to this, is that when we are courageous and we do really shift the way that we think about the world, I think that that's how we end the systematic oppression that we've all
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And I love Brene Brown. Definitely have to check out her Netflix show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also love Netflix as well. So that sounds great. I appreciate that. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, like that whole thing about being courageous. That's why I love teaching kids, because I find that sometimes they're being courageous and sometimes they don't even know that they're being courageous. You know, like I've had a student share out, we talk a lot about identity in the classroom, and he shared out that he has two moms, and that was something that was really like courageous of him to do. And I don't know if he knew how courageous it was, but it allowed another kid in the class to make a connection and be like, yeah, I also have two moms. And it's starting to like normalize that for our kids, and it's like, when you're courageous, you allow other people to also elevate their own narratives. And I think that is powerful, because it allows people to make connections in a way that makes them more included in the community, right? And that's how we build community. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
I think that's so beautiful.
speaking of those leaders, in our community, Representative Kapela, you are a leader in this community. Like we said, this is a small island. I don't know. I know, like Kevin said, and big shout out to our listeners across the world.
Mm-hmm.
But these islands are small communities, and you've stepped up and you've been an example. And that is, in my opinion, and I would imagine in our team's opinion, we consider that champions. Mm-hmm. We consider you a champion, a true champion. Would you be willing to share championship advice with our audience?
Okay, yes, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you, because I also think that you folks are such champions, and I listen, love, and admire your folks' podcast and the work that you folks do in and out of the classroom. So it's such a privilege to be here. I guess how do I phrase my champion advice? I think my advice would just be to constantly be courageous and to get really comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because I feel like in many parts of my life, I often have that like outsider syndrome where I don't know if I'm good enough for X, Y, or Z, but you do it anyway. And I think that in itself is something that's really, really powerful. I think I got a lot of my start working in politics, in trying to be a champion or trying to be a leader through the Miss Hawaii and the Miss America organization. And I would say that probably my very first experience, or like how I felt being a champion, was actually through Miss Hawaii. I was the first person in over 20 years to win the title of Miss Hawaii from Kona, which was really exciting. But I ran for Miss Hawaii because I felt like I needed to have something tangible in order to be a leader. And it wasn't until at the very end of my year as Miss Hawaii, and I had to run multiple times because that's just how it is for me. I run multiple times in order to get there. That's another piece of champion advice. Try and try and try again, because you're not always going to get it your first try. And it builds, it's yes. The journey, right? It builds courage, and it builds inner strength and crazy determination to get there on the third, fourth, or fifth try. So throwing that out there too. But my very last speech or community event was at a high school, and my platform when I was Miss Hawaii was sex trafficking, #ItEndsWithUs, and I ended up starting a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending sexual exploitation through the power of education, because once again, education is the most powerful tool to change the world. And I started this speech, and I remember at the end of it, I was speaking about human trafficking. And I remember telling a story about the first victim that I ever worked with. And she was when I met her, she was 16. When she first became trafficked, she was 13. And she ended up passing away while we got her out, she ended up passing away right before I gave up my crown as Miss Hawaii. And I ended up giving the speech a couple of days after she passed. And I remember ripping the crown off of my head in the middle of the speech on stage and saying that this means nothing. And while I had worked so hard and for many, many years to get that crown, it took me to win Miss Hawaii and to be Miss Hawaii to realize that a crown that I worked so hard for, that honestly, I think you can buy them on like Amazon for like $40, but that it wasn't the crown that meant anything. And that I had everything that I needed inside of my own heart and inside of my own mind to make all of that same change. And I think that it's a championship advice for students to know that it doesn't matter what your title is, how much money you have in your bank account. If you have a vision, just go and do it. Because if not you, then no one else will, because no one has that same amount of uniqueness that you have in you. to change the world. So yeah, I will forever remember ripping that crown off my head and knowing that while it was something that I worked really hard for, that it was the lives that I touched, the people that I've changed, the people that I've helped rise or that helped me rise. That meant so much more than a crown. And I think that for me, I take that with me every single day that I walk into the state capitol. And that's why behind me on my desk, I'm at home today, but on my desk in the state capitol, I have photos of people from my community. Because they are who make leaders leaders. They are the fabric that holds our community together. It's not the person that sits in the building. And that's why I think that truly strong leaders are not at the top. They're at the very, very, very bottom, lifting others up. And that would probably be my biggest piece of advice, is to know that no matter how much you can accomplish, that the most amazing thing you can accomplish is believing in yourself and believing in others around you and fighting to make a stronger, more successful community. Just believing in the world around you and believing in the beauty that the world still has to offer. That to me, I think, is being a leader.
Oh,
thanks.
powerful. And yes, you are a true, beautiful leader who inspires us. And thank you so much for sharing that advice. I mean, I'm sure you had several championships and four championships. Is that what we're putting up the four?
4 different pieces of advice.
Oh.
Is that what you're saying, Juan?
4. I just wanted to make sure we got that down. We got 4 in a championship corner first. We've got 4 official pieces of championship advice, and I want to make sure I've got them down correctly.
Nice.
Get comfortable being comfortable. Try and try and try and try again. A crown doesn't mean anything. And believe in yourself for your community.
Yeah. Hey, but get comfortable being uncomfortable.
But it's also good to be comfortable and, and that could work too, Juan. But in this case, Jeanne's word is to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. Obstacles lead to growth. That's one thing that I've learned. And it's how we look at them, right? It's not, oh gosh, why is this happening to me? This is awful. It's, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I react differently? And what can I do better? And that's always how I've seen obstacles. And sometimes it's hard, but it's worth it.
Yes.
And that's what we call in the classroom having a growth mindset. And we're just so lucky to have you on here today. And for all of our listeners, this was a true gem where they're going to get to listen to this and they're going to get to reflect on your words and everything that you've shared today. And with that, folks out there, if you're listening, continue to support us. Please make sure that you go to www.maestrosvibe.com/donate. Just like I said at the top of this program, so that we can continue to make schools cool to talk about. And I'm going to pass the mic on over to Juan Jefe Espinal as we bid you folks adieu for today.
Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here as we continue to talk about schools. And thank you to our listeners. Go ahead, rate us, review us, leave us 5 stars if not. We might be inclined to think that you don't support education. It's free to subscribe, by the way. Thank you. Ahoy ho.
Yes. Till next time. Thank you, Jeanne. It's been a pleasure. You're amazing. Keep doing your thing. We appreciate and love you very much.